Hi, my name is Sam. Me and my friends visit this very weird place called the Devil's Domain, and you're invited if you dare enter. This place has a very sinister background, but what we do is chill out there, light a fire, and tell scary stories. And you are invited to sit back, relax by the fire, and listen to the spooky stories told. Enjoy.
I was in high school. I would always get made fun of because of the way I looked or how I sound. I have tried to defend myself, but that never seemed to work. I tried ignoring them, that didn't work. I tried calling them names back, but that didn't make me feel good. I didn't want to stoop down to their level. I was in school walking down the hallway and one of the bullies trips me. I fall right on my face. Then, everyone starts laughing at me. I get up and run to the bathroom to cry. I hate my life, I said. My life sucks. My life would be so much better if it wasn't for those bullies. The lights flicker. Then they turn back on. As I clean myself up, someone else comes in the bathroom, and all I hear is them saying my name. I don't believe in violence. Also, the fact that he is twice my size isn't a fair fight. I tell him to leave me alone, and he laughs and tells me if I don't come out from the stall, then he will come in. I come out of the stall and tell him that I don't want to fight and that I don't want any problems. He doesn't care. He looks right at me and punches me. I fall to the ground, and then he gets on top of me and starts hitting me some more. "I'm gonna end you," he says. Then the lights start to flicker some more. Then behind him, I hear a voice. "Get off of him or you will regret it." The bully also hears the voice. He looks behind him and there's nothing there. Then the bully is about to hit me again, and then the voice says, "I warned you." The bully gets up and looks behind him again. There's this figure, very pale skin with a hoodie and clothes covering most of his body. The bully says, "I'm not scared of you." The lights turn off and 3 seconds later, they turn back on. There's nobody there. It's just me. The bully and the mysterious figure are gone. I was very confused and blacked out. I wake up at home and I thought it was all a dream. The next day, I go back to school. Then I notice that the bully is nowhere to be found. I asked some people, and they told me that they haven't seen the bully since yesterday, and that what happened to me is true. That it wasn't a dream. I did get beat up by the bully. Well, I try not to worry about it and live my life. I made a lot more friends, and I became a lot more happier. I became the popular kid, and now I had to beat up a kid to show that I was in charge of that school. All of my friends looked up to me like I was their boss. I've enjoyed it. It's now been a couple of more years later, and I still haven't heard of that kid. Maybe he moved or got expelled for hitting me. Whatever happened to him, it was for the best. As I'm about to leave school, I have to use the bathroom. I go in there and go to the stall. As I'm using the bathroom, I hear a voice. The same voice I've heard when I was getting beat up by the bully. The voice said, "I liked you. It's a shame that you are a bully." I didn't think too much about it. Then it hit me. "Oh no," I said. I try to run out of the bathroom, but then the lights flicker, then turn off for 3 seconds. Then turn back on, and there's nobody there.
My friend and I always used to walk through a wonderful spacious park when we were younger. It was full of tall trees and it was very nicely maintained. In this large park, there was an abandoned mansion. I can't really say how long it had been there, but on that day, the front door of the mansion was wide open. The two of us decided to check out what was inside the place. As we inched through the door, the very first thing we noticed was that the mansion's floor was littered with crumpled up pieces of paper. We looked at each other and observed that there was no furniture, nothing except for those wrinkled balls of paper. The mansion had 6 rooms on its main floor, and every room we entered bore more and more scrunched up pieces of paper. We decided to open up one of the paper balls to see what was inside. Our curiosity got the better of us. I picked up a single wrinkled piece, and as my friend picked up another, I unfolded my paper, smoothing out its bends and dents. At that moment, it was almost as if a piece of a rainbow emerged before our eyes, and I was suddenly standing next to a large window in one of the upstairs rooms of the house. I was looking outside into the large park when I looked down at the piece of paper I held. It read, "Look outside the large window that oversees the park in the upstairs parlour." I dropped the piece of paper and it fluttered gracefully to the ground. Meanwhile, I stared at my open hands in a bout of horror. Dazed and utterly perplexed, I found my way downstairs and met up with my friend. He was in the kitchen, sitting at a round table that hadn't been there before. Where did that come from? I wondered. My friend stared at his opened paper and reread the words several times before he looked at me and turned the page my way. It said, "Go to the kitchen and sit at the round table." We stared at each other for a few moments, vaguely afraid, but then we began to chuckle. We stared at each other for a few moments, vaguely afraid, but then we began to chuckle. Within seconds, we were laughing our heads off, marvelling at our newfound game. We could hardly believe what had happened, but being young as we were, the mystery was endlessly exciting. We decided again to open up another scrunched piece of paper. As we opened up the crumpled papers on the floor, we experienced the same sudden flash of rainbow colours. But this time, I ended lying down in the field behind the mansion. When I peered onto the paper in my right hand, it read, "Lie down in the field behind the mansion." I giggled uncontrollably. After a few minutes of running around the house, I found my friend collecting multiple balls of paper in his arms, eager to experience more of these strange, exciting phenomena. We both got the gist of what was happening at this point. We had no idea as to how it was possible, but we decided to have more fun with it. The supernatural always had a way of captivating our hearts. After a few more run-throughs with these strange mini teleportation devices, I began to feel apprehensive. I wondered if at one point I would be placed somewhere I didn't want to be, or I'd be made to do something that I didn't enjoy. We continued though. Minute after minute, we unfolded many papers and travelled through bedrooms, closets, trees. But then, after having been on the roof of the mansion, I stood before my friend, dead on the living room floor. I didn't scream. I couldn't murder him. I read on my crumpled page as I felt a surge of vomit and bile rising into my throat. Nothing came out, but the sickness in my throat spread to my stomach, my head, and my heart. I didn't know what to do at this point. I began to scream and shout, praying to God for this to be a nightmare. I wanted it to go away. I wanted to rewind our day and be outside again, together walking underneath the trees. I willed myself to be calm, and I hesitantly unfolded another paper in the hopes that the problem would correct itself. Once again, I saw the colours of the rainbow, and I found myself standing behind a tree several metres away from the house. I could clearly see the front door within a few instants. I saw both myself and my friend walk through that door. I began to wonder if I had died or if I was having an out-of-body experience. I looked at the sheet in my hand, and the only words scrawled upon it were, "Will repeat itself." Time will repeat itself, and a paradox will take place, and it will be allowed. That gave me an idea. In my pocket remained the paper that made me kill my friend. Without looking at it, I crumpled it back up. Quietly, I followed my other self, who had separated from my friend, as he explored the rooms of the house. As I crept behind him, he turned around very suddenly. Before he could utter a syllable, I forced the paper in front of my eyes, and in a flash of rainbow colours, I was able to kill my other self. The laws of time allowed me to take over my dead self's place in this world, and also because of the fact that it was allowed to happen. As it was written on the second piece of paper that I had on me, which reversed time, it must have control over time and paradoxes, which made me now the new alive and present of my other dead self. I hid my limp, bleeding other dead self in a cupboard in the upstairs bathroom to rot. To my great relief, I heard my friend call my name from downstairs. My friend who managed to stay alive, and well, my best friend. When I went downstairs, he greeted me excitedly, smiling childishly, and being blissfully unaware of the situation. I pretended that nothing had happened. In a heartbeat, I told him that the house creeped me out and that it would be much better if we left. After that day, we never went near the mansion again. I don't know if anyone saw or heard about anything that happened between us, but I recently heard from another friend that the house had been demolished. I dreaded the probable prospect that my corpse was uncovered in the bathroom cabinet.
This happened about 6 months ago, and I recently took an Uber for the first time since this incident, so I thought I'd share. I was leaving a work function at a bar around midnight in a large city, about an hour away from the suburban home I share with my partner. For reference, I'm a woman in my mid-20s with an average build. Not tall, not strong, definitely not threatening in any way, and I was a bit buzzed that night. I'm talking like 3 drinks, so not incapacitated in the slightest. Anyway, I'd ordinarily take a company car home, but I hadn't reserved one since I didn't know what time I'd be leaving, so I just decided to Uber. The company reimburses me for the bill anyway, so it was no difference to me. Once the Uber pulls up, I say goodbye to my colleagues and get in the back seat. I'm always very nice to my Uber drivers, so I introduce myself. This driver, let's call him Ed, since I don't actually know his real name, seemed totally normal. No red flags, and we make pleasant conversation for about 15 minutes until we are squarely out of the city on the way to the suburbs. From the pleasant conversation, I learned he lives in a certain neighbourhood not far from my home. Note that his neighbourhood was relatively nearby, would be completely out of the way en route we are taking to my home. The conversation reaches its natural end, so I just stay a bit quiet and start looking at my phone, Reddit, whatever. The quiet is interrupted by his voice. suggesting I take a nap if I feel tired. It didn't even strike me as weird at first, so I just thanked him for the offer, but I wasn't that tired. He then said, "Oh, I always get sleepy when I'm drunk. Are you sure?" At this point, something in my body made me even more wide awake than before. I replied that I wasn't drunk and, like I had said, I had just had a few drinks, so no need to nap. Haha. "I'll be home soon enough anyway." He dropped it after that, but I still thought it was weird he'd say that. About 5 minutes later, he says that the highway had some weird construction going on, and that the single lane traffic ahead would make my trip way longer than it needed to be. He asks if it's okay to take another route. I oblige, already on edge and just wanting to be at home. My partner calls at that moment, asking when I'll be home, and I make sure to make it very clear I was talking to my significant other. Something was weird about this guy, and I wanted him to know that someone is expecting me at a specific time and knows where I am. After I hung up the phone, the Uber driver stays quiet and we get off the highway, on a different exit than I'd ever used, but I guess that'd be expected on a different route home. I'm bullshitting on my phone because I don't want to talk to this guy anymore, not even looking up until he says, "My house is only 5 minutes from here, okay?" Pit in my stomach, I'm probably a good 25 minutes away from my house right now, a distance enlarged, I'd later learn artificially, by his shortcut. I say some nonsense about how I like the neighbourhood, and how my boyfriend and I were thinking of moving here instead, blah blah, basically anything I can think of to make it seem like I don't think this is weird and I'm not picking up on any signals. Surprisingly, he doesn't say anything in response, and now starts driving on a road in a direction I knew led to my house. Phew, crisis averted, right? Except, not exactly. 15 minutes to go and my surroundings are more familiar. Just as I'm starting to feel more at ease, he starts asking questions about my boyfriend. What does he do? How long have you guys been together? And other seemingly normal questions. Finally, with about 10 minutes to go, he asks if my boyfriend makes me happy. He does, very much, so I gush a bit and say yes, he makes me very happy. Then he asks if I make him happy. I thought that was weird, but humour is my defence mechanism, so I say, well, I should hope so. 8 minutes away. He turns onto a side street and pulls over onto the side of the road, looks back at me over his headrest, and asked if I'd make him happy too. I said, what? Mostly because I can't even believe what's happening. He asks me again, do you want me to make you happy tonight? I took a second to think through my options. I'm alone with this guy who's behind the wheel. The street is dark and I don't see any lights on at nearby houses. Close to 1 AM at this point on, and at a weekend, and I don't know what the hell this guy has in the car. I default to the response many women know to be the true barrier to men's advances. I don't think my boyfriend would like that very much. His weird grin falls away from his face and he says, he doesn't have to find out. Come on, make me happy. I know a few ways you can start. I tell him my boyfriend is expecting me home any minute, and besides I love him and don't want to hurt him. Can you please just take me home? I carry a small knife and a little canister of mace, but all I could think of was to appeal to this guy's sensitive side. Somehow it worked, and he didn't say another word after that, just turned back around and silently drove me home. Weirdly enough, I say thanks as I get out of the car. Old habits die hard, I guess. And that was that. I got into my house and start crying immediately, for some reason as soon as I hug my partner. He tells me I need to contact Uber immediately and tell them what happened so that the guy doesn't try to take advantage of anyone else. I agree and pull up the app to file the complaint. Except when I look at my last ride, the picture on my profile was 100% not the same guy who drove me home. The car was the same, but not the driver. The guy in the photo was brown and wore a turban, maybe early 40s. The guy who drove me home was white and seemed just a bit older than me. Uber never followed up with me and just refunded my money. I did tell the police what happened because my partner insisted, but they didn't take me seriously since nothing actually happened. I was worried for a while since the guy knew where I lived, but apparently it's long forgotten since I just took an Uber today. Moral of the story: always make sure the photo in your Uber driver's profile matches the person who's driving the car.
Susan was a regular 17-year-old high school student, but what made her different than her classmates was her father was a famous senator. Because of this, everyone knew they were a very rich family. One day, everything changed in Susan's family when her dad got a phone call for ransom of $1 million for the safe return of his daughter. He was told if he contacted the police or FBI, she would be killed. He took the deal seriously, but still told the police, and they organised a plan. They would try to trace the next phone call. They used triangulation to pinpoint what area the kidnapper was making the call from, but there was a pickup organised in an old bridge that hardly was ever used. Susan's dad knew if the police came, they would ruin the whole thing, so he had $1 million fake notes printed, hoping the kidnapper would hand over Susan and not notice. When Susan's dad Frank arrived at the bridge, the perp was wearing a scarf over his face and asked for the money, then handed over Susan. Frank was delighted to have his daughter back. The next day, Susan met her boyfriend, who had been the guy pretending to kidnap her. He said, "Hey babe, your dad must really love you to hand over $1 million just like that." Then he raised a gun to Susan's head. "But you must not love me to cheat on me. You must think I'm stupid to not know. You have been cheating on me the last few weeks. That's why I talked you into pretending you were kidnapped to get more money off your rich father." He then shot Susan. Later that day, he realised in a shop that the notes were counterfeit, and he was arrested. Frank had the notes numbered and an alarm on them to there be a notification when they were being spent. Not only was Susan's boyfriend caught for kidnapping and ransom, but he was also arrested for murder. My friend and I always used to walk through a wonderful spacious park when we were younger. It was full of tall trees and it was very nicely maintained. In this large park, there was an abandoned mansion. I can't really say how long it had been there, but on that day, the front door of the mansion was wide open. The two of us decided to check out what was inside the place. As we inched through the door, the very first thing we noticed was that the mansion's floor was littered with crumpled up pieces of paper. We looked at each other and observed that there was no furniture, nothing except for those wrinkled balls of paper. The mansion had 6 rooms on its main floor, and every room we entered bore more and more scrunched up pieces of paper. We decided to open up one of the paper balls to see what was inside. Our curiosity got the better of us. I picked up a single wrinkled piece, and as my friend picked up another, I unfolded my paper, smoothing out its spins and dents. At that moment, it was almost as if a piece of a rainbow emerged before our eyes. And I was suddenly standing next to a large window in one of the upstairs rooms of the house. I was looking outside into the large park when I looked down at the piece of paper I held. It read, "Look outside the large window that oversees the park in the upstairs parlour." I dropped the piece of paper and it fluttered gracefully to the ground. Meanwhile, I stared at my open hands in a bout of horror. Dazed and utterly perplexed, I found my way downstairs and met up with my friend. He was in the kitchen, sitting at a round table that hadn't been there before. Where did that come from? I wondered. My friend stared at his opened paper and reread the words several times before he looked at me and turned the page my way. It said, "Go to the kitchen and sit at the round table." We stared at each other for a few moments, vaguely afraid, but then we began to chuckle. We stared at each other for a few moments, vaguely afraid, but then we began to chuckle. Within seconds, we were laughing our heads off, marvelling at our newfound game. We could hardly believe what had happened, but being young as we were, the mystery was endlessly exciting. We decided again to open up another scrunched piece of paper. As we opened up the crumpled papers on the floor, we experienced the same sudden flash of rainbow colours. But this time I ended lying down in the field behind the mansion. When I peered onto the paper in my right hand, it read, "Lie down in the field behind the mansion." I giggled uncontrollably. After a few minutes of running around the house, I found my friend collecting multiple balls of paper in his arms, eager to experience more of these strange, exciting phenomena. We both got the gist of what was happening at this point. We had no idea as to how it was possible, but we decided to have more fun with it. The supernatural always had a way of captivating our hearts. After a few more run-throughs with these strange mini teleportation devices, I began to feel apprehensive. I wondered if at one point I would be placed somewhere I didn't want to be, or I'd be made to do something that I didn't enjoy. We continued though. Minute after minute, we unfolded many papers and travelled through bedrooms, closets, trees. But then, after having been on the roof of the mansion, I stood before my friend, dead on the living room floor. I didn't scream. I couldn't murder him. I read on my crumpled page as I felt a surge of vomit and bile rising into my throat. Nothing came out, but the sickness in my throat spread to my stomach, my head, and my heart. I didn't know what to do at this point. I began to scream and shout, praying to God for this to be a nightmare. I wanted it to go away. I wanted to rewind our day and be outside again, together, walking underneath the trees. I willed myself to be calm, and I hesitantly unfolded another paper in the hopes that the problem would correct itself. Once again, I saw the colours of the rainbow, and I found myself standing behind a tree several meters away from the house. I could clearly see the front door within a few instants. I saw both myself and my friend walk through that door. I began to wonder if I had died or if I was having an out-of-body experience. I looked at the sheet in my hand, and the only words scrawled upon it were, "Will repeat itself." Time will repeat itself, and a paradox will take place, and it will be allowed. That gave me an idea. In my pocket remained the paper that made me kill my friend. Without looking at it, I crumpled it back up, Quietly, I followed my other self, who had separated from my friend, as he explored the rooms of the house. As I crept behind him, he turned around very suddenly. Before he could utter a syllable, I forced the paper in front of my eyes, and in a flash of rainbow colours, I was able to kill my other self. The laws of time allowed me to take over my dead self's place in this world, and also because of the fact that it was allowed to happen. As it was written on the second piece of paper that I had on me, which reversed time, it must have control over time and paradoxes, which made me now the new alive and present of my other dead self. I hid my limp, bleeding other dead self in a cupboard in the upstairs bathroom to rot. To my great relief, I heard my friend call my name from downstairs. My friend who managed to stay alive, and well, my best friend. When I went downstairs, he greeted me excitedly, smiling childishly, and being blissfully unaware of the situation. I pretended that nothing had happened. In a heartbeat, I told him that the house creeped me out and that it would be much better if we left. After that day, we never went near the mansion again. I don't know if anyone saw or heard about anything that happened between us, but I recently heard from another friend that the house had been demolished. I dreaded the probable prospect that my corpse was uncovered in the bathroom cabinet. Me and my friends were camping for the weekend, and we were really excited, as we had planned it for weeks. There were 4 of us, 2 boys and 2 girls, 2 couples. We were deep in the woods when we decided to set up our tent. Each couple had their own tent. It was a moonlit night, so the brightness that was there was coming through the trees, even though it was still very dark, as the trees blocked out most of the moonlight, which added to the creepiness of the whole atmosphere deep in the woods. We lit a fire in the middle of the space we set up the tent. It was hard work gathering the wood, harder than I expected. I never expected it to be so hard building a fire in the woods. In the movies, it's almost like the fire is already there. After the fire was lit, we started drinking some beer and told ghost stories. Suddenly, when it was my time to tell my story, I heard some noise over by the trees. I feared it was a bear or even some crazy stalker. My friend walked over to investigate, and he suddenly jumped and screamed, then started laughing and said, "Oh my God, guys, ye are so overdramatic." Then suddenly something caught his eye. He was bending down to look at something in the grass and picked it up. He seemed to be holding a piece of wood, and whatever was on it was making him act very strange. We all asked him, what was it? When he walked over, he showed us and said, "That's weird, right?" It was a piece of wood with "Find Me" written in red. I felt fear overcome me, wondering, could it even be blood? My friend said, "What the hell is this about?" I said, "It looks pretty weird. I mean, find who?" My other friend was laughing, saying, "Maybe it's the boogeyman. Woo!" His girlfriend started laughing, until there was another noise from over the other side of the clearing. My friend walked over and yet again saw another piece of wood with writing on it. He brought it over to show us. "I'm down this direction. Keep going." We all said together, "No way are we going down there." I didn't feel comfortable going to sleep, but it was too late to trek back out of the woods at this time of night, so we just decided to call it a night and be happy to get out of here in the morning. When we were just about to rest our heads and get some sleep, I noticed there was a shadow of a hand outside my tent. I froze in fear, anticipating what it could be outside, and told my boyfriend. He reluctantly opened the zip of the tent, and there, outside of the tent, was a little boy drenched from head to toe in water. He was about 10 years old, and he was crying, saying, Why didn't anyone find me?" Suddenly, he seemed to disappear into thin air. We had the pieces of wood with the writing gathered outside, so we decided to keep them to tell the police the next day. When we did, the sheriff looked at us, strange. "Ye damn kids, playing these sick games. Why can't ye let that poor boy rest?" That night, we learned that 10 years ago, on that very night, in the direction the piece of wood was telling us to go, a 10-year-old boy drowned while running from his parents to hide while they were playing hide and seek. Me and my friend were enjoying our weekend in my new house, which my mom and dad told me was my great-grandmother's house. It was an awesome house which reminded me of houses you'd see in those cool mystery movies, big and mysterious. But since we moved in, which was just over a month ago, my mom and dad told me not to go into a certain room downstairs. The door was locked, but I knew my dad kept the key in his drawer, as I saw him put it there last week. We entered the room and nothing looked out of place. It was just an empty room, apart from a chair and a closet with stuffed birds on top of it. My friend stood on the chair and picked up one of the birds. Suddenly, a woman who we never laid eyes on before started shouting at us. I wondered who was this crazy woman and what was she doing in our house. We both ran out of the room and locked the door, and I rang my dad right away, explaining what had just happened. He got mad at me when he came home, saying he told us to not ever go into that room. Then he asked me what the lady looked like. When I explained to him, me and my friend felt shivers up our spine when he had said we just described his great-grandmother. A few minutes later, he showed us an old black and white photograph of her. This woman was dead for over 50 years. The next day in school, we were in nature class, and my teacher said, "Well, class, today I have a very special guest to tell us all about birds." Me and my friend felt like we couldn't move with fear when we saw the lady who entered the room was my great-grandmother. Suddenly, everyone else in the class seemed to vanish into thin air, and it was just me and my friend and my great-grandmother. The classroom window smashed and loads of birds started flying around the room. Me and my friend screamed and ran home. When I got home and explained what happened in school, things got even weirder when my dad told us today was Saturday and there was no school. He then showed me a journal he had kept from my great-grandmother. It said, "My father was arguing with my mother again, and I am crying now because he shot my pet birds, the only thing I had to keep me sane in this crazy house." I then suddenly felt sorry for my great-grandmother, and realised she wasn't dangerous after all. She was just a lost soul in this world that got angry at anyone interfering with the birds in her room. So now I am not afraid of my great-grandmother. I look at her stuffed birds and pray that in the other world she will soon find peace. And now I don't look at her as a crazy woman. I look at her as what I call her, the bird lady. I work for a small newspaper company, and I usually just write about things happening in the community. One story though got me particularly interested, and it was about a woman who lived in filth. Her neighbours had been complaining about odd foul smells coming from her house. It isn't the type of story that I usually do, but it was different, and that's what got me interested. When I got to her house, I could clearly see from the front of the house how filthy it all was. The thought of going inside started to become a regrettable decision. I mean, first encounters count, right? And I didn't mean to be so judgmental straight away, but looking at her house, it gave off the sort of impression that this was a person who didn't look after herself that much. I also talked with some of the locals, and what they told me about her didn't give off a good judgment of character. This woman was clearly out of touch with everything around her. At the same time, I wanted to know more about her, and me, being a nosy person, I couldn't help but wanting to know more about her. Clearly, something had happened in her life to make her live like this. I had already called her to make sure she was okay with me looking into her life, and she agreed to show me her way of life and to explain to me why she lives the way she does. The filth had a stench, and I was surprised that she hadn't died from any bacteria, because it seemed like the right environment for bacteria and viruses to survive. Her mental state was questionable, and she had old cassette players and VHS players all over the place, which don't really exist anymore. When I asked her why she lived like this, all that she could tell me was that as long as filth smelled like the way it should, it was all good. Everything was a mess, and I don't know why, but it kind of all got me being grateful for all the things I had in my life. On the other hand, I am sure someone with OCD would love to clean every speck of this place, and with everything out of order, it told me that her life must have been out of control. Things were broken, and she survived on government benefits and some inheritance from her parents. I could hear small things moving around, and they must have been rats or some other animal. It's weird how animals can survive in such mess. I guess their immune system must be better than ours. Actually, maybe this woman's immune system might be amazing at this point because she has survived this long in this mess. She told me about her mother and father. She was brought up in a 5-bedroom house. She also had 2 younger siblings, and after she had told me that she had siblings, I quickly assumed that her siblings had wanted nothing to do with her, which I was gravely wrong about. I tried asking more questions about her upbringing, but all she told me was, just go to the house of my childhood and notice how the filth gives off an amazing aroma. I then went to her childhood home, and I could clearly see that it had been abandoned for many years, and Mother Nature had clearly took over the house. It's sad how houses begin to go under after they had been abandoned, and it reminded me of the only thing I had remembered in my sociology class before I changed courses to journalism. It's people that give meaning to buildings and materialistic things, not the object itself. I kicked the door down as I could clearly see that the front door was past its prime. From what the house looked like, I had expected odour and stench to hit my nose, but instead I got to smell the most amazing aroma I had ever smelt in my life. I then started searching her childhood home for anything interesting to find. This woman's childhood home was exactly like her own house, and I don't know why, but I started to become irritated by this woman. In my generation, we are finding it difficult to even buy a home, and even if someone from my generation has managed to somehow buy a home, it's hard to keep it maintained. Yet this woman has managed to live in a big childhood home as well as having her own home, which clearly she had decided to neglect it. It's unfair, but I guess life is just unfair. It was all a mess, and I was beginning to find it all predictable with the neglect of having any care or pride in one's own life. Maybe her parents were abusive, and I wondered more about her siblings, because now I wanted to know why she was so alone in the world. We all need someone, no matter who we are, but then again, loneliness is a big problem in Western civilization, and we even have someone in the government whose main job is to tackle things like loneliness. Loneliness becomes more apparent as we get older, and this woman was old now, and with the inventions of social media and computer games, it's made loneliness even more stronger. The only good but odd thing about this woman's childhood home is the nice aroma and smell. I decided to follow the aroma because I couldn't resist it anymore. The aroma could be smelt the most from behind the sofas. And you know how in cartoons, when one cartoon character follows a pack of sweets, all lined up because it was being set up? That's what happened to me. When I looked behind the sofas, I gasped with horror and with utter disbelief, because I never thought that I would ever look upon something so disgusting and completely random. I saw 4 skeleton bones, still giving off a perfume-like scent. And this is not the type of smell you would think death could give off. I mean, with an amazing smell present, you would think something was full of life to give such a scent. I went back to see the woman, and I didn't call the police just yet because I wanted to know more, and I wanted her permission first of how to proceed with everything that I had just found. When I told this woman of filth, of what I had experienced in her childhood home, she started tearing up. Instead of calling the police, she just turned on the VHS player, and I started to watch something, like an explanation video. At the same time, I also have to shamefully admit, finding all of this would have progressed my career in the journalism world. Even though I had just found something terrible, my career coming to my mind showed how I could have profited from this. Anyhow, the video told me more things about what was really going on. Hello, my name is Dr. Rogerson Peake. I have invented a pill that could make any dead person smell nice. When a body starts decomposing, it usually starts to smell. But with this pill, a decomposing body will be the most sweet-smelling thing you have ever smelt. The cassette player kept on playing. After watching the whole video, a few thoughts came to mind. Yes, the pill would give the dead person a bit more dignity by smelling nice. And it will also help people who deal with dead bodies, like in hospitals. But at the same time, This might be a great advantage for a murderer or serial killer. Imagine someone had murdered someone in your home, but the murdered person had this pill before being murdered. It could be some time before you notice something is off. Something smelling nice usually doesn't give an image of death or tell you that something is decomposing. It's always the nasty smell which makes us think something is off. Like when I was in this woman's childhood home, I honestly didn't think I would find something to be dead. Do you see how this might be an advantage for a serial killer or murderer? And I started to understand why this woman lived like the way she lived now for such a long time. I felt bad for being so judgmental or for thinking about my career gain of this whole story. I also started to glue together who those skeletons belonged to. From common sense, those skeletons behind the sofa in her childhood home must have been her 2 parents and 2 siblings. And I thought they had just abandoned her because of the way she had lived her life. Is someone trying to kill you? I asked this woman. My whole family took part in the experiment to eat the pill. We were struggling for money at the time, and they promised us that they would pay us lots of money to eat the pill. They weren't 100% honest with us, and none of us knew what the pill was made for exactly, she told me. She started crying a little bit, and the more I understood her story and why she lived the way she did, it was sad, just so sad. How we humans can be so unsympathetic or not care enough to understand someone but rather to judge and cast aside. After taking the pill, one midnight someone broke into my home and I was just a child back then, and this man had murdered my mother, father and both my siblings. I hid in a secret wall cupboard in my room which my father had built. For weeks this strange man who broke into my house observed my whole family's dead bodies. They all started to smell nice as they decomposed. I overheard his talk on the phone, and they wanted to use this pill in war and other scenarios where death is common, but they wanted to hide the deaths and murders. If something smells nice, no one would ever think something has died, she explained to me. She managed to escape when the strange man went for a smoke in her garden, and I couldn't believe what I had just been told. This story was not just a story, but probably one of the biggest scandals in the 21st century. I had to write about this and get this story out, and I phoned the police about the 4 skeletons in this woman's childhood home. Something had to be done, and we all know how shady the government can be and some of the things they can be capable of. This woman deserved justice. I hugged her and she pleaded me not to go to the police, but obviously I decided to go against her. I went back to my flat, and as soon as I entered, a beautiful scented aroma hit my nose. But I never sprayed anything inside my flat recently. I checked my whole flat and I found a dead body in my bathtub. The dead body had a note attached to it, which read, "Be wary of your steps, lad." I straight away drove to the woman's house, and this time, instead of the scent of filth hitting my nose, it was a perfume-like aroma, and I knew she had been murdered in her own living room. There was a note on her body which read, "We are watching, and the dead body in your flat has been taken now." And I couldn't believe it. I checked her childhood home, and everything inside had been taken, and no sign of police of any kind. They knew I would check on this woman after finding a dead body in her apartment, as well as her childhood home. I I'm being watched now.